Victor Hawthorne sat across from his wife, Lily, his jaw clenched tight, the weight of the moment sinking deeper with each passing second. He had known for weeks that this conversation was coming, but nothing had prepared him for the finality of it. The thick mahogany desk in his office, the expensive leather chairs, and the view of the sprawling city below seemed irrelevant in the face of the heart-wrenching decision he had to make. "Lily," he began, his voice cold despite the storm brewing inside him, "I don't think we can continue like this. We've tried everything, but you still can't conceive." Lily's face paled, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had known this day might come. In their 3 years of marriage, she had sensed it, his disappointment, his impatience, but she had refused to believe he would actually choose his family over her, over them. She reached out to him, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Victor, I've tried. You know I've tried. But this isn't our fault. We can't just—" He cut her off, his eyes avoiding hers. "I don't have a choice. You know what my mother expects. The family legacy. It's more important than anything else. Our bloodline needs to carry on, and I can't risk everything for this anymore." He paused, struggling to find the right words, but they came out cold, detached. "I'm sorry, Lily. It's over." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily's heart shattered as the man she had loved, the man she had believed in, stood before her, cold and distant. She had always been the one to support him, to love him unconditionally, even when his family had never truly accepted her. But now, the final blow had come. Her infertility had become the thing that severed their bond, a cruel reminder of her failure in his eyes. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had always been strong for him, for them. She had always believed that love could conquer anything, but now she saw that she was nothing more than an obstacle to his family's expectations. With a sharp breath, she stood up, the weight of the conversation sinking in. "If that's what you want, then I won't stop you. But don't ever think I'll forgive you for this, Victor." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I'll leave, but I'll never forget the way you made me feel." Victor didn't move, didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, unable to meet her gaze. He didn't know what was worse, the pain of seeing her hurt or the crushing guilt that gnawed at his soul. But the decision had been made, and there was no turning back. As Lily walked out of the office, her heart breaking with each step, the rain began to pour outside, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the end of something that had once been so pure. She knew that her life, as she had known it, was over. The love she had built with Victor had been shattered in an instant, and now, all she had left was a suitcase filled with broken dreams and a promise to herself that she would never, ever forgive him. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that mansion, in that gilded cage, with a man who had so easily cast her aside. She hailed a cab, her hands trembling as she clutched the door, and told the driver to take her to the train station. She would leave the city, leave everything behind, and start over. It would be hard, yes, but she would do it on her own. As the cab sped through the streets, the rain beating down on the windshield, Lily allowed herself a single tear, though it wasn't for the man she had loved. It was for the life they would never have, the children they would never raise together, the future she had dreamed of, now reduced to a distant memory. Victor Hawthorne had made his choice, and so had she. Lily stepped off the train at the San Francisco station, the noise of the bustling city surrounding her like a wall of sound. She stood there for a moment, staring at the swarming crowd, unsure of where to go or what to do next. The weight of her decision to leave behind everything, the life she had built with Victor, the dreams they once shared, pressed heavily on her chest. But there was no turning back now. The city felt both vast and impersonal, a place where she could lose herself in the crowds, where no one knew her and no one could judge her. It was the perfect escape from the life that had crumbled in her hands. Lily found a modest hotel in the heart of the city, a small place with faded curtains and an old, creaky elevator that barely seemed to work. It wasn't much, but it would do. She couldn't afford anything better, not yet, and truthfully, she didn't want anything more extravagant. She wasn't here to find luxury or comfort. She was here to heal, to find herself again, far from the prying eyes of her past. The first few days were a blur of exhaustion, loneliness, and quiet desperation. Lily spent her time wandering the streets, getting lost in the maze of buildings, trying to lose herself in the chaos of a city that seemed so full of life, yet felt so empty to her. She didn't know anyone here. She had no family, no friends to lean on. The only thing she had left was the shattered remnants of the life she once had. But Lily wasn't the type to give up easily. She had always been strong, even when life seemed to turn its back on her. And now, as the days turned into weeks, she began to find her footing again. She found a small cafe on the corner of a busy street that was looking for help. The owner, a kind woman named Grace, welcomed her with a warmth that reminded Lily of the simpler days of her life. The work was grueling, but it gave her a sense of purpose. There were no expectations here, no judgment. The cafe was quiet, and the people who came in were kind, or at least polite. For the first time in a long while, Lily didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was just her, no longer Victor Hawthorne's wife, no longer the woman who couldn't give him the one thing he wanted most. She was just a woman trying to find her way. It was during one of those quiet shifts, as she wiped down the counter and lost herself in the rhythmic motion of cleaning, that Lily felt something unexpected. A flutter, a twist of emotion deep in her belly. It was subtle at first, nothing more than a passing sensation, but as the days went on, it became clearer. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, sweeping over her in an instant. She froze, the rag slipping from her fingers as she stared at the counter. Her heart pounded in her chest as she processed the thought. Pregnant. For a moment, she wanted to laugh at the cruel irony of it all. Victor had abandoned her because she couldn't give him children, and now she was carrying twins, children that he would never know. But the laughter never came. Instead, it was replaced by a feeling she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For the first time since leaving Victor, Lily felt like she had a future. Not the future she had once dreamed of, filled with Victor and a perfect family, but a future she could build on her own. A future that was hers to shape. A future that didn't require anyone else's approval or validation. She would raise these children, and she would do it alone if she had to. They would be her strength, her reason to keep going. But there was a darker side to the revelation too. The fear, the terror of facing the world with a growing belly, of facing a future without the support she had always imagined. She wasn't sure how she would do it, how she would raise these children on her own in a city that was both a new beginning and a reminder of everything she had lost. Still, she knew one thing for certain. She would not let Victor's absence define her or her children. They were hers now. They were her family. And no one would take them away from her. The months that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Lily. Her pregnancy wasn't easy, and as her body grew with the weight of the twins, so did the weight of her memories. Each day felt like a quiet battle as she navigated the physical and emotional challenges of motherhood alone. Yet, through it all, she never wavered. She couldn't afford to. She found herself wrapped in a cocoon of determination. She knew that her life had been reshaped by one cruel decision, Victor's choice to leave her, but now she had the power to choose a different path. A path that led to a future of her own making. Her dreams of a perfect family with Victor faded into the distance, replaced by the daily reality of growing life inside her and the future she would now build. The first time she felt the babies move, she cried. Silent, overwhelming tears. It was as if they were telling her, without words, that they were already here for her, that they would be her redemption, that they would be her reason to keep going, even when everything else seemed so uncertain. On a cool autumn evening, Lily's contractions began. She had known this moment was coming, but the pain caught her by surprise. The labor was long and exhausting, her body working in ways she had never imagined. Yet, with each wave of pain, she thought of the life that was waiting for her at the end of this tunnel. Her boys, her sons. When the first cry rang out, sharp and strong, Lily felt a rush of joy, followed by a moment of disbelief. Ethan had arrived. She had done it. She had given life to a little boy who, no matter the circumstances, was hers. And then, moments later, the second cry echoed through the sterile hospital room. Leo had arrived. She had not one son, but two little miracles who had been waiting for her all along. Lily cradled them in her arms, tears of joy streaming down her face. The world outside the hospital room seemed distant and irrelevant. She had done it. She had created life, and in doing so, she had created a new purpose for herself. These boys would never know the pain of rejection that she had suffered. They would never know what it was like to be discarded by a man who had once sworn to love her. They were hers, and she would protect them, no matter the cost. As she held them close, their tiny hands grasping her fingers, Lily thought of the man who had once been her husband. She thought of Victor and how, despite everything, she couldn't fully erase the memory of him from her heart. He had been the man she thought she would build a future with. He had been the one who had promised her a family. But he wasn't here now. He hadn't been here for the months of late-night cravings, or for the endless doctor's appointments, or for the pain of labor. He had walked away from all of it, and Lily had walked away from him. Still, she knew that the life she had now, the family she had created, was not a punishment. It was a gift. She would give these boys everything, the love, the care, and the support that she had always longed for. They would know what it was like to be loved without conditions. They would know that no matter what, they were wanted, needed, and cherished. As she lay back against the hospital bed, exhausted but fulfilled, she made a promise to herself. She would never again allow anyone to define her worth. Not Victor, not his family, not anyone. She was stronger than she had ever known. And her boys, her beautiful boys, would always remind her of that strength. Outside the window, the rain began to fall, soft and steady. It was a peaceful sound, one that mirrored the calm that was settling in her heart. She had been through so much, but now she could finally see a future that was hers to shape. It was a future filled with love and hope, no longer shaped by someone else's expectations. The birth of Ethan and Leo had not just been the beginning of their lives. It had been the beginning of her own redemption. Meanwhile, across the country in New York, Victor Hawthorne's life continued on. But it was a life that felt like an empty shell, devoid of the joy and warmth that had once filled his heart. His marriage to Victoria was nothing more than an arrangement, a duty fulfilled, a legacy maintained. There was no love between them, no spark that connected their souls. He had married her because his mother, Kimberly, had decreed it. She had insisted that Victor marry someone from a suitable family, someone who could bring honor to the Hawthorne name. Victoria was perfect in that regard, but that was where the connection ended. The days bled into each other, a monotonous parade of meetings, gala events, and family gatherings. Victor's eyes never truly met his wife's. They lived in the same grand, cold mansion, but they were as strangers to each other, bound by obligation rather than affection. Victoria, too, had long since given up on any hopes of warmth in their union. She had accepted that her role was to be the dutiful wife, producing the heirs that would carry on the Hawthorne name. And she tried. She tried so hard, but no matter how many times she went to doctors, how many procedures she underwent, the child she so desperately wanted to give her husband had never materialized. It was a constant pressure, a suffocating weight that she couldn't escape. Kimberly, Victor's mother, hovered over her at all times, her presence a looming shadow, constantly reminding her of her duty, constantly reminding her that time was running out. Every time Victor would come home to find his mother's disappointed gaze fixed on him, he could feel the suffocating tension growing. Victor buried himself in work, retreating further from the emptiness of his home life. But it was never enough to drown out the quiet desperation that gnawed at his soul. He had built an empire, one that his family was incredibly proud of, but the more he achieved, the less fulfilled he felt. All the wealth, all the success, all the accolades, none of it brought him happiness. The mansion that once felt like a place of warmth and family now felt cold, its grand halls echoing the emptiness inside him. And then, there were the nights. The quiet nights when he lay in bed beside Victoria, the sound of her breathing slow and steady in the dark. In those moments, when the house was still and the world outside seemed so far away, Victor found himself thinking about Lily. It was a thought that haunted him. The way her hair had caught the light when they were young, the softness of her touch, the warmth of her smile. How she had been the center of his world, the woman who had made him feel whole. But he had abandoned her. He had left her behind because of his mother's demands, because of the family legacy. He had chosen his inheritance, his bloodline, over the woman he loved. And now she was gone. As he lay there in the darkness, Victor found himself wondering if she had ever truly loved him, if she had ever forgiven him. His heart ached with the questions, but they were questions that had no answers. All he knew was that the life he had now, the life he had chosen over her, was a hollow existence. At that moment, he understood what he had lost. He had traded everything for nothing, and now, as the years stretched on, he could feel the slow erosion of his own happiness, the slow decay of the man he had once been. There was a gnawing emptiness in his soul that no amount of success could fill. As he stared at the ceiling, Victor realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He had let the people around him dictate his choices, and in doing so, he had sacrificed the one thing that had truly mattered: Lily. And then there was the unsettling thought that kept him awake. What if she had moved on? What if she had found happiness without him? What if she was raising a family of her own? The questions churned in his mind, but there was no way to find the answers. Meanwhile, across the country, Lily was living a life of quiet strength, raising her twins in the small apartment she had made into a home. She was doing what Victor had never believed she could. She was thriving. She had her children, she had her purpose, and she had no room in her life for the ghosts of the past. But life had a funny way of making the past resurface when you least expected it. 7 years had passed since Lily had left Victor, and in that time, her life had taken shape in ways she could never have anticipated. She had become more than the woman who had once clung to the remnants of a broken dream. She had transformed into a mother, strong, unwavering, and filled with an indescribable love for her twin boys. Ethan and Leo had brought her purpose and joy, and each day was a step forward in a life she was proud of building from scratch. The cafe she worked at was thriving, a cozy little place nestled in a corner of the city where the hustle of San Francisco seemed to slow for just a moment. The regulars were like family, and the quiet hum of the cafe felt like a sanctuary to her. She had made friends, true friends, people who cared for her, not for her past, but for the woman she was now. And yet, despite all that she had built, there was a part of her that still wondered about Victor. Not out of longing, but out of curiosity. What had he become? Was he happy? Did he ever think about her? About the life they might have had? It was a fleeting thought, something she kept at the back of her mind, buried beneath the duties of motherhood and the routine of her new life. The pain of his abandonment had dulled, but it had never fully disappeared. One crisp autumn morning, as Lily was rushing to the cafe, juggling the twins' backpacks and her own bag, she turned a corner and almost bumped straight into someone. Her eyes widened in surprise, and the world around her seemed to freeze for a brief moment. Victor. He stood there, his dark eyes fixed on her with a look of shock and disbelief, his face more weathered than she remembered but still unmistakably him. The same man who had once promised her everything and then turned his back on her without a second thought. But there he was, standing right in front of her, looking like he had walked straight out of her past. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Time seemed to stretch, and Lily's mind raced. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never like this. Never so real, so raw. She had thought of him, yes, but had never allowed herself to truly entertain the idea that he might seek her out. And now here he was, standing in front of her, as if the years of silence and distance had never existed. "Victor," she said quietly, her voice betraying none of the emotion that swirled inside her. Her gaze swept over him, noting the faint lines of age on his face, the way his once neatly combed hair now fell messily over his forehead. He had the look of a man who had been through some kind of inner battle. "Hi, Lily," he said, his voice soft, almost unsure, as though he were trying to find his footing in a world he hadn't expected to be part of again. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Lily swallowed hard, trying to suppress the flood of emotions that threatened to overtake her. She had spent so long convincing herself that she had moved on, that she was done with the past. But seeing him again, after all this time, brought a whirlwind of memories rushing back. She had buried those memories deep, but they were still there, ready to resurface. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady, but the question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Victor shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as though he were searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about you. About us. About everything," he said, his tone hesitant. "I made a lot of mistakes. I've never stopped regretting what happened between us." Lily's heart clenched, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. "Regret? That's all you have to say?" Her voice was edged with bitterness, and she wasn't sure if she was angry or just hurt. Maybe both. Victor's eyes lowered, guilt written all over his face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Lily, but I've changed. I've seen what my life has become without you, and I can't keep living in this hollow existence." Lily crossed her arms, studying him with a mixture of disbelief and guarded curiosity. He was standing here now, acknowledging the wrongs he had done. But where had he been when she needed him? Where had he been when she had been struggling alone, raising their children without him? "You made your choices, Victor," she said quietly, but her words were heavy. "You chose your family's legacy over me, over us. And now, years later, you want to talk about regret? I know I was selfish." Selfish? Lily interrupted, her voice rising. "You don't get to just apologize after everything you've done, after abandoning me when I needed you most. You have no idea what it was like, raising those boys without you, without any help, without any support. I did it all alone." Victor winced, the pain of her words cutting deep. He had always known that he had made the wrong choice, but now hearing it from her, hearing the years of anguish in her voice, made him feel as though the weight of his mistakes was crushing him. "I'm sorry, Lily. Truly, I am. I can't change what happened, but I want to make it right," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Lily felt a surge of anger, but it wasn't the same anger that had once consumed her. It was something different, something raw, something real. She had built her life without him, without his promises, and she didn't know if she could ever truly trust him again. But, at the same time, a part of her couldn't deny that seeing him here, asking for forgiveness, made her question everything she thought she knew. "Make it right," she whispered, almost to herself. "You can't make it right, Victor. You can't undo the past. You can't just walk in here and expect things to be how they were. You've missed too much. We've all moved on." Victor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and for the first time, Lily saw the depth of his regret. It was not just for abandoning her, but for the life he had chosen. One filled with hollow promises, a life that left him yearning for something he could never get back. "I know," he said softly, "but if you'll let me, I want to be a part of your life again, a part of their lives." His voice cracked as he spoke of their children. "I want to make amends. I can't undo what I've done, but I can try to do better." Lily stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what to say or how to feel. The truth was, she didn't know what she wanted. She had lived so long without him, without any trace of the man she had once loved. She had built a life that didn't rely on him. And yet, the part of her that had once loved him, the part of her that still wanted to believe in him, whispered, almost in spite of herself, that maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something new. But she wasn't ready to let him back in. Not yet. "I need time," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I need time to think." Victor nodded, his face filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "I'll wait, however long it takes." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lily standing in the middle of the street, her heart torn between the past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The days that followed their encounter were filled with an almost unbearable tension for Lily. She could not stop replaying the conversation in her head. The look in Victor's eyes when he spoke of regret, the way his voice cracked when he mentioned their children. It had stirred something deep inside her, a part of her she had thought was long buried. She had convinced herself over the years that she was done with him, that she no longer felt the sharp sting of abandonment, that she had moved on and built a life for herself that didn't need him. But in the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by the echoes of her twin son's laughter, the truth began to settle in like an uninvited guest. Part of her still cared. She had spent so long hating him, feeling the weight of every moment he had walked away from her, from them. The betrayal had shaped the woman she was today. The woman who didn't rely on anyone but herself, who carried her pain in silence, who didn't allow anyone close enough to hurt her again. But now, with the reality of his presence back in her life, she couldn't ignore the cracks in the armor she had so carefully built around her heart. As the days went on, Lily found herself avoiding the thoughts of him. She threw herself into her work at the cafe, focused on her children, and tried to quiet the storm inside her. But Victor was always there, lingering in her thoughts, his apology echoing in her mind. Could she forgive him? Could she allow him to be part of their lives after all the years of hurt? It was one of those sleepless nights, when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear, that Lily's phone rang. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen. It was Victor. Taking a deep breath, she answered. Lily. His voice was hesitant, soft. I know I'm probably asking too much, but could we meet again? I need to explain. I need you to understand why I did what I did. Lily hesitated. She had spent so much time running from the past, from him, that the idea of facing it again felt like a step she wasn't sure she was ready to take. And yet, there was a part of her that knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. If she was ever going to move forward, she had to face the truth of what had happened between them. I don't know if I'm ready to hear it, Victor, she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempts to remain composed. I've lived with the pain for so long. I don't know if I can just let it all go. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking for a chance to explain, he replied, his voice full of earnestness. Just one more chance to show you that I'm not the man I was. Lily closed her eyes, the flood of memories rushing back to her. She could see the younger version of herself, so hopeful, so in love with him. And she could see the moment he had walked away, leaving her heartbroken and confused. The pain of that moment had been like a wound that never fully healed. But maybe it was time to face it. Maybe it was time to find out if there was any possibility of healing, of finding some peace. All right, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I'll meet you. They agreed on a time and place, a small, quiet park in the city, far from the noise of their everyday lives. Lily didn't know what to expect, but she knew that this meeting would change everything. When Lily arrived at the park, the air was crisp, the leaves of the trees beginning to turn shades of gold and red. The sight was beautiful, peaceful, but Lily's heart raced as she approached the bench where Victor stood, waiting. He looked different somehow, not just in appearance, but in the way he carried himself. The man who had once been so self-assured, so confident in his choices, now seemed fragile, almost vulnerable. Lily, he said softly when he saw her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of what she was thinking. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. She nodded, but said nothing. She wasn't sure what to say. The silence between them stretched, filled with years of unsaid words and unresolved pain. Victor finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I need you to know something, Lily. What I did, leaving you, choosing my family's legacy over you. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I was a coward. I let my mother control my decisions, and I was too weak to stand up for us. I thought I could live without you, without the life we were building together. But the truth is, I couldn't. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had spent so many years telling herself that he had chosen his family, his wealth, over her, that he had never truly cared for her. And yet here he was, admitting that he had been wrong, admitting that he had failed her. It was more than she had expected, more than she had allowed herself to believe he could feel. I didn't know you were pregnant, Lily, he continued, his voice quieter now, tinged with regret. When I walked away from you, I had no idea that you were carrying my children. I had no idea that I had abandoned my own flesh and blood. And that is something I can never forgive myself for. Lily closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. The pain of those years, the loneliness, the feeling of being abandoned and forgotten, came rushing back. But now, hearing his words, it was different. It didn't take away the hurt, but it was something. An acknowledgement. A truth that had been missing for so long. I did it all alone, Victor, she said, her voice trembling despite her attempts to remain calm. I raised Carl and Oliver without you. I had no choice. I didn't have you. I didn't have anyone. Victor's face contorted with guilt, his eyes filled with unshed tears. I know, and I will never be able to undo that. I can't change the past, but I can try to make things right moving forward. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. Hell, I don't expect you to ever forgive me completely, but I want to be part of their lives, Lily. I want to be the father they deserve, and I want to be the man you deserve. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. For a long time, Lily didn't speak. She just stared at him, searching his eyes for any trace of the man she had once loved, any trace of the man who had walked away without a word. And then, slowly, she nodded. All right, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. We'll see. But it's going to take time, Victor. It's not going to be easy. You don't just get to come back into our lives and act like nothing happened. Victor nodded, his eyes full of understanding. I know. I'm willing to wait. For as long as it takes. And with that, they sat in silence, both of them knowing that this was only the beginning of what would be a long and difficult journey. As the days passed since their meeting in the park, Lily found herself walking a fine line between hope and disbelief. Victor's apology had shaken her, but it hadn't dissolved the years of pain and anger that lingered in her heart. She wasn't ready to trust him, not yet, but there was something in his eyes that made her wonder if he was truly a man changed. Could she ever let him back into their lives? Could she risk allowing the father of her children to return, knowing all the heartache he had caused? Lily spent countless nights lying awake, her mind racing. Carl and Oliver were growing up so quickly, and she had built a life for them on her own, one filled with love, stability, and the knowledge that they were enough. Her motherly instincts told her to protect them, to keep them safe from the dangers of the world. But there was a new danger now, Victor. And the war that had always simmered beneath the surface of their relationship was about to rise to the surface once again. It wasn't long before Lily learned that Victor wasn't the only one interested in the boys. One afternoon, as she was sitting with Carl and Oliver in the park near her apartment, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. She recognized the driver immediately. It was a man she had seen in the photos of Victor's life, someone whose cold, calculating gaze had never failed to send a chill down her spine. Kimberly Warburton. Kimberly Warburton, Victor's mother, had always been a force to be reckoned with. It had been Kimberly who had pushed for Victor to marry the woman his family deemed suitable, who had made it clear that Lily was nothing more than a brief distraction in her son's life. Kimberly was a woman used to getting what she wanted, and now she had her sights set on Carl and Oliver. Lily, Kimberly said as she approached, her voice sharp and cold, I need to speak with you. It's about the boys. Lily stood up, her protective instincts flaring. She had seen enough of the Warburtons' influence to know that this was not going to be a casual conversation. The last time she had dealt with Kimberly, the woman had made it clear that she viewed Lily and her children as nothing more than obstacles. Now, it seemed, she was prepared to take matters into her own hands. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Kimberly, Lily said, her voice firm. She stepped closer to her sons, as if to shield them from the woman who stood before them. My children are not for sale, and they are not your property. Kimberly's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it, only the coldness of someone who was used to getting her way. You misunderstand me, Lily. I'm not here to buy them. I'm here to ensure that my grandchildren are raised in the right environment. They belong with their father, not with you. Lily's heart raced, her blood boiling at the audacity of the woman before her. Victor hasn't been a part of their lives for years. He left us, he abandoned us. And now you think you can just waltz in and take them from me? Kimberly's eyes narrowed. You're mistaken if you think I'm here to take anything. I'm here to ensure that Carl and Oliver have the future they deserve. One that's secure, one that's filled with the privileges of the Warburton name. Lily clenched her fists, every nerve in her body screaming to protect her sons from this woman, from the same forces that had torn her life apart. They are my children, Kimberly. And no matter what you or Victor think, they will stay with me. I will not let you destroy their lives." Kimberly's smile disappeared, replaced by an icy resolve. "We'll see about that. Victor and I will make sure they get the life they deserve. You have no say in the matter." Lily felt the weight of her words pressing down on her. This was not just about Victor anymore. This was about a family that was determined to take everything from her. Everything she had fought so hard to build for her children. But Lily wasn't going to let them win. She held her ground, her voice steady but fierce. "I'll fight you every step of the way, Kimberly. You won't take my children from me. I will protect them with everything I have." Kimberly's eyes locked onto hers for a long moment, as if calculating her next move. Finally, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement like a death knell. But Lily knew this was far from over. Kimberly Warburton was a force to be reckoned with, and the battle for Carl and Oliver's future had only just begun. As the black car disappeared down the street, Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Her sons were safe for now, but she knew the storm was coming, and this time, she wouldn't face it alone. Victor may have come back into their lives, but it was his mother who would prove to be the real enemy, and Lily was ready to fight. The next day, Lily met with Andrew. He had become a steady presence in her life over the years, someone who had supported her when she needed it most. He had never asked for anything in return. He had simply been there for her, for the boys. She knew she could trust him. "Kimberly's back," she told him, her voice tense. "She's trying to take the boys away." Andrew's expression darkened. "I knew it was coming. You're not alone in this, Lily. We'll fight together." Lily felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. And together, they would make sure that Carl and Oliver would never be taken from her. The battle lines were drawn. Lily knew that her life had just taken another unexpected turn, one that would test her resolve and strength in ways she had never imagined. But as much as she had braced herself for this fight, there was a deep sense of foreboding gnawing at her. Victor's return, coupled with Kimberly's scheming, made everything feel uncertain. Yet, even in the midst of the storm, there was a small flicker of hope. She had Andrew, and he was unwavering in his support. But that wasn't the only surprising thing that was unfolding. One evening, just a week after her tense encounter with Kimberly, Lily received an unexpected call. It was from Victoria Warburton, the very woman who had once been married to Victor. The same woman who had, until now, seemed like a distant figure, lost in the shadows of the Warburton family's powerful web. Lily had never spoken much to Victoria over the years. She had always assumed that she was just another player in the Warburton world, a woman who had been forced to marry Victor because of family expectations. Yet, the voice on the other end of the phone was calm, measured, and surprisingly empathetic. "I need to talk to you, Lily," Victoria said, her tone serious. "Can we meet?" Lily felt a strange mixture of hesitation and curiosity. Why would Victoria want to meet with her now, after all these years? And more importantly, why was she reaching out when everything was falling apart? After a brief exchange, they agreed to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. When Lily arrived, she found Victoria sitting at a corner table, her posture stiff but her expression calm. There was something different about her, something that made Lily think that perhaps she wasn't the woman she had once believed her to be. "Thank you for meeting me," Victoria said, looking up as Lily approached. "I know this must seem strange to you." Lily nodded cautiously, but didn't speak. She wasn't sure what to expect from the woman who had once been married to the man who had abandoned her. "I'm not sure where to start," Victoria continued, her voice low. "But I need you to understand that I'm not here to cause any more problems for you. I know what you're going through, and I'm sorry. I've watched for years as the Warburtons destroyed everything in their path. I was a pawn in their games just as much as you were." Lily raised an eyebrow, a sense of disbelief creeping in. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You were trapped in this too?" Victoria sighed, her gaze distant, as if recalling the painful memories of her own life. "I never wanted any of it. When Victor and I were married, I thought I had no choice. The Warburtons, especially Kimberly, have always controlled everything. They told me who to marry, where to live, and even how to raise our daughter. I was just as much a prisoner in that world as you were. Lily's heart tightened. She hadn't expected this. She had assumed that Victoria had lived a life of luxury, a life untouched by the suffering that Lily had endured. But now, listening to her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. I never wanted to hurt you, Lily, Victoria continued. And I never wanted Victor to hurt you. He made his own choices, but I was never in control of his actions. And Kimberly, she's always been the one pulling the strings. Lily stared at her, still processing the words. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Why come to me now, when everything is falling apart? Victoria looked directly into her eyes, a hint of determination in her voice. Because I'm done being a part of their games. I'm done letting them control my life, and I'm done letting them destroy yours. I've seen what they've done to you, to your children, and I can't stand by and let it happen any longer. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected this, never imagined that Victoria would be the one to stand up for her, to offer an olive branch in the midst of the chaos. But there was something in Victoria's words that struck a chord with her. It was a quiet defiance, a desire for something more than the life the Warburtons had dictated for them. I'm here to help you, Lily, Victoria said, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken promise. I know how the Warburtons work. I know how to fight back. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure Carl and Oliver have a chance at the life they deserve, away from the control and manipulation of my family. Lily felt a rush of emotions, anger, confusion, relief, but mostly a sense of gratitude. She didn't fully understand what Victoria's motivations were, but in that moment, she knew she couldn't turn away from the offer of help. Victoria wasn't just a member of the enemy camp. She was someone who had lived a life of her own suffering and was now, against all odds, reaching out to help Lily. I don't know how to thank you, Lily said, her voice shaky with emotion. I never thought anyone in your family could care. I thought you were all the same. Victoria smiled softly, a hint of sadness in her eyes. I can't undo the past, Lily, but I can help make the future better. I know how Kimberly works, and I know how to fight her. Together, we can take her down. Lily nodded, feeling a spark of hope she hadn't known she could feel again. With Victoria's help, the odds seemed a little less overwhelming. They would fight for Carl and Oliver, for their future, and for a chance to finally break free from the chains that had bound them all for far too long. The stakes had never been higher. Kimberly Warburton had already made it clear that she would stop at nothing to claim Carl and Oliver as her grandchildren, to bring them into the Warburton legacy. Lily had tried to shield her sons from the looming threat, but it was becoming clear that the war she feared was already upon them. And now, with Victoria's unexpected support, Lily knew that she had to prepare for the fight of her life. Andrew, the one constant in her life, stood by her side through it all. He had been there for her in ways she couldn't have imagined all those years ago. Now, he was ready to take on the Warburtons in full force, and his presence gave her the courage to push forward. But it wasn't just Andrew. Victoria's knowledge of the Warburton family's power structure, their legal connections, and their ruthless methods made her an invaluable ally. Together, they formed a plan, a united front against the forces that sought to destroy their family. The first step was to get ahead of the Warburtons. Andrew used his network of contacts to dig into the family's financial and legal holdings, while Victoria began to dig deeper into Kimberly's past. She knew her mother-in-law better than anyone, and she understood that Kimberly's obsession with legacy and control could be her greatest weakness. Victoria was ready to exploit that weakness, but they needed evidence, hard proof, that Kimberly had no right to demand custody of the boys. As the days passed, Lily found herself growing more anxious. She had never been in a legal battle like this, let alone one with so much at stake. The Warburtons were powerful, and their reach was far and wide. But Lily had something they didn't: a mother's will to protect her children and a fierce determination to never let them be taken from her again. It wasn't long before Kimberly launched her first attack. She filed a formal petition for custody, citing the Warburton legacy and the boys' rightful place in their family as the foundation for her case. The paperwork was official, and the court date was set. Lily felt the weight of it all bearing down on her, the pressure of knowing that every decision she made from here on out would determine her son's future. In the days leading up to the court hearing, Lily and Andrew met with their lawyer, a seasoned family law expert who had dealt with high-profile custody cases before. His name was Samuel, and while he was cautious about the Warburtons' influence, he was confident in their case. "We have the facts on our side," Samuel said as he reviewed their evidence. "The boys have been with you since birth, Lily. They've never known anything else. Kimberly can't just waltz in and take them because she thinks they belong in her world. We need to show the court that you're the one who has provided them with stability, love, and care." Lily nodded, but her stomach churned. She wasn't sure it would be enough. She knew how powerful the Warburtons were, and she had seen what they could do to people who got in their way. But she also knew that she couldn't back down. Not now. Not when Carl and Oliver needed her most. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. Lily, Andrew, and Victoria arrived at the courthouse early, hoping to get a moment to strategize before the proceedings began. As they walked through the lobby, Lily couldn't help but feel the eyes of the Warburton family on her. Kimberly was there, seated with her legal team, a smug look on her face as if she were already victorious. But what Kimberly didn't know was that they had a powerful weapon of their own. Victoria had quietly gathered a group of people who could speak to the truth of what had happened within the Warburton family. The manipulation, the pressure, the control. She had spoken to former employees, distant relatives who had witnessed the darker side of Kimberly's reign, and legal experts who knew how to navigate the complicated web of family inheritance and power. It was a risk, but it was their best shot. The courtroom doors swung open, and the hearing began. The Warburton team wasted no time in presenting their case. Kimberly's lawyer painted a picture of the perfect life Carl and Oliver would have with their grandfather's name, wealth, and influence. They argued that the boys had a right to be raised in the Warburton tradition, one of power, status, and privilege. But Lily's lawyer, Samuel, countered every point with grace and precision. He highlighted the fact that Carl and Oliver had known no other life but Lily's, a life grounded in love, support, and stability. He argued that the boys' best interests were in their mother's care, where they had thrived and grown into happy, well-adjusted children. Then it was Victoria's turn to take the stand. Lily had been nervous about this moment. Could she trust Victoria to speak the truth and not be swayed by the power of her family? But as Victoria took the witness stand, her resolve was clear. She spoke calmly but with undeniable conviction about the Warburtons' dysfunction, about how Kimberly had always prioritized control over love, and about how Victor had never been a true father to Carl and Oliver. She painted a picture of a family whose ideals were not grounded in kindness, but in legacy, power, and manipulation. Lily sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding as she listened to Victoria's testimony. She had never imagined that someone from the Warburton family could stand up for her, but here was Victoria, her former enemy, fighting alongside her for the future of her children. As the day wore on, it became clear that the court was leaning in their favor. The evidence, the testimonies, and the undeniable bond between Lily and her sons were starting to outweigh the Warburtons' claims. But just as it seemed they were on the verge of victory, the judge turned to Kimberly's legal team, giving them one final chance to present any new evidence. Lily held her breath, bracing for the worst. Kimberly's lawyer stood and nodded to the judge. "We have one more piece of evidence to present, Your Honor," he said, his voice cold. "We have recently learned that Lily has been receiving financial support from an outside source, someone who is not her husband. We believe this may be a factor in the boys' well-being and their ability to maintain the lifestyle they deserve." Lily's heart sank. It was a last-ditch attempt to discredit her, to paint her as someone unfit to raise her children. She knew the Warburtons would stop at nothing, but this was a low blow. Before she could react, Andrew leaned over to her, his voice a whisper of reassurance. "Don't worry. We've got this." Would they? Would the final twist be the one to bring it all crashing down? The court was tense. The walls of the courtroom felt like they were closing in on Lily, the weight of the Warburton family's influence pressing down on her shoulders. The accusation of financial support from an unknown source was something that had been carefully orchestrated to undermine her credibility as a mother. The Warburtons had always played dirty, and now, In a final attempt to steal her children, they were playing their trump card. But Lily didn't back down. Andrew's reassuring presence beside her gave her strength. He had been her rock throughout this entire ordeal, and now, more than ever, she needed his unwavering belief in her. She could feel his quiet confidence, the steadiness in his gaze that told her they weren't finished yet. The judge, an older man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, looked down at the paperwork in front of him. He was calm, measured, but his eyes told a story of years spent in courtrooms, dealing with the most powerful families in the city. He had seen it all, and in this moment, it was clear that he was weighing the truth, the love of a mother for her children, against the wealth and power of the Warburtons. "Mr. Daniels," the judge said, addressing Kimberly's lawyer, "we are aware of the nature of this claim. However, unless you can provide more substantial proof of financial misconduct, this court will not entertain baseless allegations." Kimberly's lawyer nodded stiffly but did not back down. "Your Honor, we believe that this source of financial support is critical to understanding Lily's ability to care for her children. The fact that it has remained hidden raises serious questions about her financial transparency." The judge raised his hand, silencing the lawyer. "Enough. We will proceed with the evidence at hand." Lily's heart pounded, her thoughts racing. She had expected this kind of attack, but the sting of it was still sharp. They were grasping at straws, trying to discredit her in any way they could. She could only hope that the judge saw through it and recognized the truth. And then, unexpectedly, a voice broke through the tension in the room. "I need to speak," a calm but firm voice called out. Lily's head turned sharply. It was Victor. He had been sitting quietly throughout the hearing, his face expressionless. But now, as he stood, he stepped forward, his presence dominating the space. He wasn't someone who usually showed emotion, but there was something different in his posture now, a sense of finality, as though this moment was one he had been preparing for. The room fell silent as Victor approached the stand, and for the first time in years, Lily saw him in a new light. Gone was the cold, calculating man who had walked away from her and their children. Instead, there was a man who seemed to carry the weight of his past decisions, a man who now faced the consequences of them. "I've listened to everything," Victor began, his voice low but steady, "and I need to make one thing clear. I have been a part of the Warburton legacy. I've done things I regret, but when it comes to my children, Carl and Oliver, they belong with their mother. I have failed them in more ways than one, and I cannot stand by and watch them be torn from the only home they've ever known." Lily's breath caught in her throat. Was this the same man who had abandoned her all those years ago? The same man who had chosen his family's legacy over his own flesh and blood? Victor continued, his voice gaining strength. "I've spent too many years chasing after power, after status. I've let my mother and the Warburton name dictate my life. But I've learned the hard way that no amount of money or control is worth losing what truly matters, your children. I'm not asking for custody. I'm asking for the right thing to be done." Lily stared at him in disbelief. It was as if the years of pain, the years of longing for him to step up, were suddenly being erased by his words. She had never imagined that Victor would admit his mistakes, let alone fight for their children. Kimberly's face had drained of color. Her carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling in real time. She shot a glare at her son, her eyes burning with anger, but Victor stood firm. He was no longer her pawn. He had made his choice. Lily felt a surge of emotions, anger, confusion, but also a deep sense of relief. The man who had abandoned her had just made a choice that would change the course of their family's future. For once, Victor had chosen the right thing, and Lily couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The judge, who had been listening intently, nodded slowly. "It is rare to hear such honesty in a courtroom, Mr. Warburton," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Your testimony has made this case much more complicated. I will take this into account as I consider the best interests of Carl and Oliver." The room was still, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Lily's mind raced. Would the judge truly see this as the turning point? Would he believe that Victor had changed, that his words were genuine? She didn't know. But one thing was clear. For the first time in years, she wasn't facing this battle alone. Victor had finally taken responsibility for his actions. And for the sake of Carl and Oliver, she would continue to fight. The days following the courtroom hearing were filled with an uneasy sense of anticipation. While Lily had hoped that Victor's confession would tip the scales in their favor, she couldn't shake the feeling that the final decision was still uncertain. The judge had reserved his ruling, and in the interim, the Warburton family was not giving up. Victor's actions, though bold, had opened a rift between him and his mother that couldn't easily be repaired. Kimberly's fury was palpable, but it wasn't just directed at Victor. She saw Lily's quiet strength as a threat, and now, her own son's betrayal only deepened her resolve to take control of Carl and Oliver. Kimberly was relentless, and her influence in the family would not easily be denied. But for Lily, the battle had shifted. It was no longer just about the Warburtons. It was about her sons, her future, and the fragile thread of hope she clung to. Victor, though, had made a choice. And now, he was determined to prove that his decision was more than just words. His actions, his genuine attempts to change, were what would define him. Lily had never known the depth of Victor's regret. She had spent years battling her feelings of betrayal, of anger, of loss. She had never believed that he could truly understand the pain he had caused, that he could truly step up and be the father Carl and Oliver needed. But now, as he made his way into her life once again, she began to see that perhaps she had underestimated him. Victor showed up at her apartment late one evening, the first time he had sought her out since the court hearing. She wasn't sure what to expect, perhaps more of the same hollow promises, or perhaps an explanation for his sudden turnaround. But what he gave her was something she never imagined: sincerity. "I know I've failed you," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've failed you and the boys, but I want to make it right. I want to prove to you that I can be the father you've always needed me to be." Lily stood in the doorway, uncertainty in her eyes. She hadn't expected him to show up, and the raw honesty in his voice left her speechless. She wanted to reject him, to tell him that his time had passed, that there was no place for him in her life. But when she looked at him, when she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, a part of her couldn't help but wonder, could he really change? "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "After everything, why now?" Victor swallowed hard. "Because I've watched my mother tear this family apart for years. I've let her control everything, and in doing so, I've ruined the most important thing in my life, my children. But I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make things right." Lily took a deep breath, her heart torn between the remnants of anger and the flicker of hope that had started to ignite within her. She had spent years rebuilding her life, and the thought of opening that door to Victor, to allow him back into their world, was terrifying. But then, her thoughts turned to Carl and Oliver. Their faces, their laughter, their need for a father. She couldn't deny that their lives had been incomplete without him, even if she had done everything she could to be both mother and father to them. "I'm not going to make this easy for you, Victor," she said, her voice strong but tempered with sadness. "You don't get to just walk in and expect everything to be okay. You've hurt us, and you can't just erase that. It's going to take time. You'll have to prove to me, and to the boys, that you're not the man you used to be." Victor nodded, his expression determined. "I understand, and I'll prove it. I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time in years, Lily allowed herself to believe that he might truly be sincere. But she wouldn't allow herself to be swept up by his words alone. Actions spoke louder than anything he could say. And for the sake of her children, she would wait and watch. Over the next few weeks, Victor worked hard to show that he was a man of his word. He spent time with Carl and Oliver, attending their school events, playing with them in the park, and engaging in their daily routines. It wasn't easy. The boys, at first, were distant, unsure of who this stranger was who claimed to be their father. But Victor was patient. He listened to them, he cared for them, and he proved, time and again, that he was willing to do the hard work of rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't a quick process, and there were moments of doubt, moments when Lily wondered if Victor was simply going through the motions. But each day, he showed up, and each day, Carl and Oliver began to let down their guard. Then, one evening, After a particularly difficult day where Victor had tried and failed to get the boys to open up, he returned to Lily's apartment. He was exhausted, but he had a new kind of resolve in his eyes. "I'm not giving up on them, Lily," he said quietly, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "I know they don't trust me yet. I know I've got a long road ahead, but I'm not walking away this time. Not for anything." Lily looked at him for a long time. There was a silence between them, a tension that spoke of all the years that had been lost. She hadn't expected him to come to her with such raw emotion, such determination. For the first time in a long while, she saw him not as the man who had abandoned her, but as someone trying to do better. "I know," she said softly, "and I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be there. For them." Victor nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I will. I promise." And as Lily watched him leave that night, she realized something. Perhaps, after all these years, forgiveness was not about erasing the past. It was about moving forward, step by step, and allowing the possibility of redemption to grow. The months that followed were a delicate dance. Lily had learned to guard her heart, but even she couldn't deny the quiet shift happening within her family. Victor had continued to prove himself, his commitment unwavering. Each day, he spent more time with Carl and Oliver, building a foundation for something new. He was still the man who had made mistakes, but he was also the man working hard to make amends. For Lily, the process was slow. There were moments when old wounds reopened, when the weight of betrayal threatened to drag her down. But as she watched her sons grow closer to their father, something inside her began to heal. She had feared that their bond with Victor would always be tainted by the past, but it wasn't. It was growing, becoming something solid and real. Victor wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the legal battle over custody had come to a tense standstill. Kimberly Warburton, despite her influence, had been unsuccessful in her attempts to tear Carl and Oliver from their mother's arms. The judge had ruled in favor of Lily, acknowledging that while the Warburtons had a significant claim, the emotional stability and love that Lily offered her children outweighed the Warburton name. It had been a victory, but it wasn't the end. Kimberly's power was far-reaching, and Lily knew that her family would never be truly free from her grasp. But for the first time in years, Lily felt a sense of peace. She had fought for her children's future, and they had won, together. One afternoon, Victor and Lily found themselves sitting in the park, watching Carl and Oliver play soccer. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt almost surreal. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the scene, and for the first time in a long while, Lily allowed herself to simply breathe. "You've done more than I ever thought possible," Lily said quietly, turning to Victor. "I didn't believe you could change, but you've proven me wrong." Victor smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I didn't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I've learned that actions speak louder than words, and I'm going to keep showing up for them, for you." Lily nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and caution. She wasn't ready to forget everything, but she was learning to embrace the future, one step at a time. "I appreciate that," she said, "but I've also learned that I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here. For them." Victor's smile softened, his eyes filled with emotion. "I'm here, Lily, and I'm not going anywhere." As Carl and Oliver raced toward them, laughing and calling for their attention, Victor and Lily exchanged a quiet glance. It was a look that spoke of understanding, of the road they had traveled, and of the road still ahead. They weren't the same people they had been when they had first met. They had both changed, in ways neither of them could have imagined. But in that moment, they realized that perhaps the greatest gift they could give their children was not just a stable home, but a family that understood the value of second chances. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the grass, Lily felt something shift within her. A quiet peace, a resolution to embrace the future. The past was not something they could change, but the future was still theirs to shape. And as Carl and Oliver ran toward them, their laughter echoing in the air, Lily knew that, together, they had a chance at a new beginning. One that was rooted in love, in forgiveness, and in the knowledge that no matter how difficult the journey had been, they were stronger for it. For the first time in years, Lily allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness, and as she watched her children, she knew that their future was bright. They had survived the storm, and now they could finally move forward together. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. We truly appreciate you taking the time to listen and immerse yourself in the journey of Lily, Victor, and their children. Their story is one of redemption, growth, and the power of second chances, and we're so grateful to have shared it with you. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more captivating tales that inspire and move the heart. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue bringing you stories you'll love. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and we'd love for you to stay connected for future stories. Until next time, take care, and thank you again for being part of this journey.